in spite of everything that we may go through and wrestle with. The Lord is still at work. The Lord is still at work. And I can't thank God enough. You know, when you go through a bunch of stuff at one time, you just never know why you're going through all of it. You never know why you're wrestling with it. You never know why you're facing it. And then you just have to tell yourself, you know what, Lord, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to trust you in this. I don't know why the Lord has led this way in what we have been discussing over the last several months. But I can honestly tell you that this has been the greatest faith walk in the preaching ministry that I've ever had. So we're going to trust God in what has to be said this morning. So, since y'all didn't run me off after what I said last week, and since I didn't get any calls from anybody district or conference-wide, and I'm still here, that lets me know that what needs to be said is what needs to be said. So this morning, I want to give part one because it's too big of a text and it's too big of an area of discussion to cover on one Sunday. But I want to talk from the thought for this part one. It'll be the same way when I do part two. Fight the right enemy. Fight the right enemy. Last week we talked about warning shots to a movement, and in the midst of what was said, I believe sometimes we can lose some of what is the setup towards where we are right now. And I don't want to do a disservice to you as your pastor or as a disservice of being in ministry without making sure that I clearly make the connection between what we dealt with last week and where we are right now. Because last week, we talked about a storm on a sea, and we didn't give enough attention to it in the sense that the storm on the sea was basically an opportunity to try to detour or distract Jesus and the disciples from what they were going to do next. You see, they were riding into a place where demonic forces had basically set up home base with the desire to make sure that everything within that region stayed locked down. And so the storm that happened was an attempt to distract, and cause people to move away from that area and not bring what the people needed. Now, I submit to you this morning that there are a lot of things happening in our world that have the desire to distract and take away our ability to focus on why we are doing what we are doing. There are a lot of things that are attempting to cause us not to pay attention to what is really going on and what our mission is. That's why I believe that we have all the different arguments that we have, not just in the church, but in the world today, because they become nothing more than distractions. If you watch the news or anything like that, I watched a clip, but I had to watch in context after a while. Professor Eddie Glaude, very intelligent man. He's a professor at Princeton, and he was on MSNBC. And when he was on there last week in the wake of all the shootings that occurred, he said something that was so significant that I couldn't let it go. I couldn't just let it go into a 2.5-minute clip because I had to see in context what he said. And he talked about how we have, as a society, as a country, we have tried to find ways to blame and put all responsibility for the things going on in our society on one person. When the reality is that that one person was not the beginning or the genesis of all the things that have been going on. That it becomes easy to blame the current president for all the stuff that is going on when history teaches us that these things are not new, that the hatred is not new, and all the things that have happened since then are nothing more than replays within the context of our society. And I was so glad to hear that because some people are not strong enough to call out what has been as a reality within our country. And then I began to read this text, and I had to ask myself, and I struggled with this, is it possible that this person who Jesus would meet was just an individual that was trying to find a way to finally be free from something that he just couldn't handle on his own? Is it possible that every time we've read this story, that we have boxed this man into the wrong box and caused ourselves to consider that maybe we haven't been looking at the enemy the right way? I know y'all looking at me confused right now, but stick with me for a second. It caught me off guard last night because I finally read this thing, I think, the right way for a change. Because the text says they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gadarenes, and when Jesus stepped out of the boat, look at this, because I think I've passed this over 18 million times, and here it is clear as day. Immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. The man met Jesus immediately when he arrived. The assumption is that the man was in the tomb still and Jesus arrived there. But the text says the man who was the one that had the unclean spirit met Jesus immediately after he arrived, which tells me that one, the enemy already knew that after he couldn't deter Jesus from showing up, he had to do something else. But number two, that this man must have been left alone just enough to finally get somewhere to get some real help. Prove it. Well, let's see. What we see in the beginning of the chapter is the man meets immediately. But what we see after that is the description of who the man is. The description is the man was possessed by a demon, was always put in the tombs, was locked down by chains. The people kept on locking him down in a dead place and basically left him for no good. He was so strong while under possession that he began breaking the chains to the point that however they were functioning with him no longer worked. So he had something on his life that was oppressive and was around a people that didn't know how to handle it. And they handled it the only way they knew how, and ultimately caused him to be forgotten and left to his own devices under the possession of a demonic spirit. Imagine what it must be like to be a human being left alone by other human beings, treated as if you are no longer a human being. And you're treated in such a way that the only way anybody knows how to deal with you is to be dismissive of what you're going through. You don't got to imagine too much, because guess what, ladies and gentlemen? It happens every single day. Because what happens is we forget about the divinity of humanity. What do I mean by that? That people are created in the image and likeness of God. And all that we see at times is the image and likeness of God under attack. And we suddenly say to ourselves, whatever that person is going through, they need Jesus, but we don't know what they were going through just to get here. Okay, cool. I know there's only a few of us, but it's all right. But let's talk about it. How many people have ever tried to come to the Lord, but the first thing that somebody says is you don't look the part? How many times have we watched people come into the church house and the best thing they had on was the few scraps on their back because they've been going through stuff left and right. They have been actually trying their best to do the best that they could. And all that people would do is snicker, stare, and wonder why they're doing all this stuff. Don't they know that they're supposed to be up in here and they're supposed to look this way and that way? You don't have a clue as to what it took for them just to get here in the first place. You don't always know what people are going through just to try to get to a little bit of light. Have you ever been in a dark room and you've been in there way too long? I'm not talking about when you go to sleep. I'm talking you wide awake. Your eyes are wide open. There is no light to be seen anywhere. After a few minutes, you'll want to get out because you're just begging for just a little bit of light to shine on you. Darkness does mess you up. Things do get at you. And after a while, you don't want that thing to be on you because you just want to live and be free. And when you're not free, and people can give you an opportunity to be free, but they refuse. They refuse to say they don't have the answer. They refuse to say, I don't know how to do it. They refuse to even try and understand and have empathy. After a while, you become subject to the thing that has taken over your life. But here comes Jesus, who just on a boat told everything in creation to get back in its place. And here he comes on the ship. After finally getting some sleep as they traveled over, he comes off the boat. And as he walks off the boat, he is met by a man who has not had a good night's sleep in many days. Met by a man who has been possessed by a demon, who has been dealt with in the worst possible way spiritually. He met this man as he got off the ship. And all he had left in him was just, can I get to him? And his humanity was wrestling against a power that was trying to keep him bound. The text later says this. After describing the man's condition, it says that the demons began to speak, wait for it, only after Jesus said, come out of the man. Which lets me know that Jesus knew exactly what to deal with. Jesus discerned this man running to him was not coming after him, but what was coming after him was a principality that can't stand the power of God. You and I have to come to a place in life where we begin to look at things not just in the flesh, but we need to have some real serious spiritual discernment. We need to stop demonizing people that are trying to be free and start understanding that we have to walk and live under the power of God that is able to see the difference between what a person is going through and the thing that is trying to take them out. I don't fight against people with differing political views. I fight against the thing that is behind that differing view that tries to keep people bound. There is a spirit behind some of the stuff that people talk about. That anytime you can talk about how somebody does not fit because of their color, because of their economic status, because of where they come from, because of their background, that is not a political view. That is a demonic spirit trying to keep division in a place that is supposedly about the free and the home and the brave. I'm not talking against anybody that wants to talk about mental health and all that kind of stuff, but I will talk against somebody that will continue to say that people don't need help, that you need to be on this end of the spectrum before you need help. Everybody needs some help. Everybody needs somebody to talk to. Everybody has a condition that needs to be addressed. Everybody needs something that's going to bring them through. Everybody needs a little light. The problem is we keep talking about the wrong stuff because we walk in the wrong spirit. So when Jesus walked off the ship, the demonic force of the region manifested itself in a man that could not go back home in his condition. And the demon said, what you got to do with us? Not the man, the demon. The demons, the regimented grouping of thousands of demons cried out and said, what you got to do with us? And begged for their existence by saying, don't kick us out of the region. What's your name? And the demon spoke, my name is Legion, for we are many, and begged that they would not get kicked out. When Jesus showed up, demons knew they were going to have to flee. When the Lord showed up, he addressed the right enemy. He did not say to the man, why are you in this condition? He said, that thing in you has got to come out. Because if we get this out, you will then be restored into what you ought to be. That's different than saying, why are you here and why have you messed up your life? All right, cool. It's different than saying you have just messed up your whole existence, and it might not be the case. People make decisions, and good decisions, all the time, and they still don't get any further than they get. Not because they're bad, but because stuff happens. We have to learn how to address the right enemy. So let me give you 3 things to help you out, because in 2 weeks, I'll come back with part 2. I got a wedding anniversary to celebrate next week. Don't look for me. There are 3 things that will help you identify the right enemy. First, you got to be able to identify it by name. You got to be able to identify it by name. Who are you? My name is Legion. That wasn't the man's name. I've heard so many preachers say that was the man. No, the man had a different name. His condition had a name. You got to call it by name. You can't just say, well, the man. No, you got to know what it is. My name is Legion, for we are many. Jesus knew then, before it was all said and done, but called it out, that he was dealing not just with a demon, but with a block of demons. Sometimes you're not dealing with just depression. Okay, preach anyhow. You're not just dealing with depression. You're dealing with PTSD. You're dealing with all kind of different things that may be going on. And no, I am not saying that mental health is a demonic thing. I'm just trying to let you know that sometimes when you're dealing with people, you're dealing with more than one thing. Having mental health issues is not demonic. That's a health issue. But if we're going to identify things, we need to learn how to do it for what it is. When people are going through stuff like that, don't call them crazy. Identify what it is, and then watch this. Learn how to deal with it properly. Everybody that's going through depression can't receive a prayer from you. Everybody going through PTSD can't just hear you say, well, the Lord's going to work it out. Don't you know that most people know that the Lord is going to work it out? It's just in the meantime, they're trying to figure out, how can I get through this moment? All right, let me flip the script. Let me flip the script. Let me talk about racism for a minute. Yeah, people want to keep on saying that it's going to be all right, that we're going to have to be kumbaya and all that kind of stuff, and keep on praying that nobody's going to call me this and call me that out of my name. But here's the reality, church. You got to deal with not just racism, but you got to deal with what else is behind it. You got to deal with white supremacy. You got to deal with hatred. You got to deal with the fact that people don't think that human beings are worthwhile. You got to call it for what it is. You can't be afraid to call out the thing that you really see. You're not dealing with the person half the time. You're dealing with what? Principalities, powers, rulers of the darkness of this world. Spiritual wickedness in high places. I wish I was still a part of a universal church that believed that you deal with some spiritual wickedness from time to time. You deal with stuff that is not looking like God at all, but you got to call it for what it is. If anybody's going to be free, you got to be able to identify the thing by name. But then the second thing that's going to help you identify the right enemy is by its resistance. Let me put something extra on it. What's the resistance to? You're identifying this enemy according to its resistance to the anointing on your life. See, some people, okay. So there's a reason why when I was younger, I decided that I wanted to become big. I had in my mind, I wanted to be bigger than most of the people that I saw. You know why that happened? Brother Jeff, you know why that happened? Let me tell you why that happened. It happened because I used to get picked on. I was picked on as a kid. People picked on me for all kind of reasons. So one day I got mad enough and I went away for a while and let my grandfather teach me how to do some stuff. My grandfather, when he was in the military, he was a boxer, not just serviceman, but he was a boxer. He was an undefeated middleweight. So he taught me how to use my hands. Then he taught me how to weight train. Then he taught me how to work on my stamina and how to go and run and do these things. So I did all this not only for sports, but one day I went back to the park and I saw my bullies and I saw that I was double their size. And I looked at them. I never touched them. You know why? Because when they saw me, what were they going to do? Because they knew that in the back of my mind, I thought about every single day that they picked on me and made me run away from the park. But all I did at that point was stand on the basketball court I wanted to play on. I looked them square in the eye, basically to tell them, try something now because you're going to get hurt. And ever since that moment, most people don't mess with me. Because when they see me, they don't know what's going to happen. Because they are hyper resistant to trying to say much to me if I come into a space. Part of it, I'm big. Part of it is the fact that I know what I'm talking about. And I had to ask myself, why don't people want to get into arguments with me about things that they like to talk about, especially when I respond? And here's what I learned. I learned that they are resistant to what it is that's really on my life, because I'm not just going in of myself, but I'm going according to the things that God has truly said. And everybody in here that tries to walk this thing out with God, don't worry if nobody responds to you. It's the thing in them that's so negative that doesn't want anything to do with what God has put in you. When you walk as you ought to walk, when you walk in the confidence and in the power of God, that thing will back down in 5 seconds, because the enemy knows the difference between what is godly and what is you. Can I call on it for just a second? When you go later on into the book and you read a little bit later in the New Testament, there's a time when these guys come around called the 7 sons of Sceva. They were trying to lay hands on people and cast out demons like Paul and the rest of them. But one day that demon looked up out of that guy and looked at those 7 sons of Sceva that were nothing more than a bunch of counterfeits. And this is what they said: Jesus I know, Paul I know, but who are you? That's why you need to have such a relationship with God that everything in you is undeniable. That when you walk into a place, if folk are backing down when you're trying to be positive, it has nothing to do with you, but it has everything to do with the God in you. Is there anybody in here that knows that when God is really reigning over your life, you can walk through issues, you can walk through circumstances, you can walk through trouble, you can walk through trials and tribulations and come out unscathed, knowing that God's got you the entire time? You ought to be able to walk in and know that whatever the enemy tries to do, it'll back down because of the God in you. They begged. They didn't ask. They begged. You know what begging looks like? Begging is a whole lot different than asking. They got down on their knees and said, please don't let us leave the region. They resisted as much as they could, which leads to the last thing. You got to be able to know your real enemy by its weakness. You ready for this? You know how many people talk a lot of garbage, but they can't back it up? Some of y'all been experiencing that all your life. You know somebody somewhere been talking trash to you about all kind of stuff. But when they see you face to face, they act like they can't say 2 words to you, because they know that all the stuff they talked could not get things moved. They know that no matter what, you keep coming. Look at what these demons did. They stirred up a storm, and the boat kept coming. They tried lightning, they tried thunder, and here's something we didn't pay attention to in the previous text. Water began filling the ship. They tried everything they could to manipulate creation, to make them back down, but Jesus said, everything hush and let me go back to sleep. And he went back to sleep, and everybody else was astonished, but the boat kept on coming. And because the boat kept coming, that meant Jesus was still coming. And because Jesus was still coming, what else can we do? And at that point, there was nothing else they could do but beg. The enemy, when they know that you are still coming and you're not going to stop, begins to beg for their life. You thought that by doing all this stuff in my world, you thought that I was not going to make it. No, I'm speaking for some of y'all because some of y'all been going through this for weeks. So I'm just talking out the things that have been in your head for weeks because, other people don't understand. How can you make it through this? And why are you still standing? And why you should have lost your mind. You shouldn't be here at all. This stuff should have took you out. Why do you even come to church after all this kind of stuff? Why are you here at all? People been saying nonsense to you. All this stuff been happening left and right. The world done lost its mind and you still standing? How is that possible? Because I know that at the end of the day, the enemy can't do any more than God allows. Because the enemy is still subject to the will and the power of God. So I don't care what I'm going through in the moment. The Bible tells me that weeping endures for a night. But joy. So even in my tears and even while I'm going through, I know that on the other side of it, there's still joy. I know that while I'm going through right now, I am mad, I'm upset, I'm frustrated, I'm tired and all that stuff. But the Bible says, don't get weary in well-doing, for in due season you're going to reap if you faint not. I'm not worried about what the enemy is going to do. They only have a little bit of a moment. They only get to do stuff here and there. But when it's all said and done, I still got victory because no weapon that is formed against me shall prosper. Every tongue that rises in judgment, thou shalt condemn, because it is my heritage. It is the heritage of the servants of the Lord. So no matter what I face and what I go through, I will make it. I will survive. I will overcome, because he said, I've overcome the world. So since you're in me, you are an overcomer too. So don't worry about it because he's weak. But because he's weak and you feel weak, guess what? You serve a God that makes you strong. He came off the boat and immediately not without fail, immediately he was met by the man. But as he was coming, Jesus called out the thing in the man and said, you have got to leave this man. And that demon or that block of demons begged for their lives because they knew it was about to get hectic. I'll see you in 2 weeks for part 2. You may be here today, and you have not made a commitment to Christ. Today is your day and your opportunity to do so. The Bible says if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised that same Jesus from the dead, you will be saved. If you're looking for a church home, looking to land in a place, unafraid to call it like it is, knowing that the Lord goes with us, no better place, no better time than to be here in this space. If you're watching us via this stream, even if you're not in here with us physically, but you have any of those things on your mind, whether it is for commitment to Christ or it is to be a part of this fellowship, let us know even via social media, and we will make ourselves available to you. But if you're here, live stream or present, whosoever will, would you come?
We're going to sing On the Battlefield. I'm on the battlefield for my Lord. And we're going to go through it twice, Avery. So stay on there. I am on the battlefield for my Lord. I am on the battlefield for my Lord, for my Lord. And I promised him that I would serve Lord. Let's do that one more time. I am on the battlefield for my Lord. Yeah, I am on the battlefield for my Lord, for my Lord. And I promised him that I would serve him till I die. I'm on the battlefield for my Lord. I'm on the battlefield again. I am on the battlefield for my Lord. I am on the battlefield for my Lord. And I promised him that I would serve him till I die. I'm on the battlefield for my Lord. Yes. Amen. Amen.
So may the Lord bless you and keep you. May he cause his face to shine upon you and give you peace. May the Lord bless you from this time forward and forevermore. In the name of our redeeming and saving Christ, we pray. And the people of God said, amen. God bless you. Hug somebody.